welcome to the Monday live edition. This is everybody's kind of waking up. They're coming off a holiday weekend. It's been a pretty eventful weekend, certainly in Texas recruiting. And we wanted to have an opportunity for you to ask some of those questions that you might have. And then also we wanted to talk about the impending release of NCAA 25 because there's some rankings that have come out that might stir the fervor of some of the folks involved. And we've got Eric with us today and also Ian. So Eric has admitted to us that he is not a gamer of any kind, and I think that's totally reasonable. However, I don't think he's also aware of some of the rankings that have come out. So before we get to any recruiting news, please go ahead and throw your questions in there. I promise you we will get to them. But I want to talk about these rankings specifically with the stadiums. Now, Eric, I know you've seen this list now. I don't know if you have or not. I'm assuming you have. I've sent it to you. Knowing that DKR is coming in at 19, all right, which I honestly is probably a little high. I mean, I don't know if that's high or low, but it feels a little high to me. Oklahoma Stadium, Gaylord Family Memorial Stadium, is coming in at 8. And then our friends down the road, A&M Kyle Field, is coming in at number 1. Now, I can tell you that I've only been to a handful of stadiums outside of the Big 12. And I'm a little bit surprised that Kyle Field is coming in at number 1. What are your thoughts on Kyle Field? I mean, is it the toughest stadium to play in the country in your assessment, Eric?
No, I think the toughest stadium to play in is the one where you're playing against the best team, and that hasn't been A&M all that often. Kyle Field is definitely known for their crowd noise. They are loud and rabid, especially at night games. I think the Texas ranking is just a lagging thing. There haven't been enough night games with this new era. But I think the stadium experience, fan interaction, I think is markedly improved over the last few years at Texas. Kyle Field, yeah, I mean, it's a tough place to play, but their teams aren't always that great. I think they do get a little bit of a bounce from the fans. Number 1 is fine. I mean, Texas just went to Bryant-Denny last year and beat them by 10. So, and they were number 2, right? Alabama's number 2. So,
yep.
I don't know. I think stadiums are overrated. It's who has the best team, the best coaching, the best game plan, the best players, and all that go into it more than crowd noise. Does crowd noise matter in a video game? Does it bother you when you're holding that controller?
There are some elements of it that are actually going to make the game harder for you to play when you're playing in a harder stadium.
You're going to have false starts?
Yeah, I'm sure you can. It also messes up your routes if you're doing it like a pre-snap route. It's going to mess that up for you if the crowd noise is a little bit too high. What are your thoughts here, Ian? I know that you are a passionate gamer. Generally, it's the RPGs, but we can get into some of the sports stuff here. What do you feel about this toughest stadium business?
I don't understand how they developed the list. The criteria seems very inconsistent to me because having Alabama 2 and Oklahoma, what is Oklahoma 9?
They're at 8. Yeah.
8. That doesn't make sense unless it's based off win-loss record because Oklahoma is notoriously not that hostile. But they have this amazing record built up, largely because they don't actually play a very difficult home schedule usually. They're just railroading Big 12 teams. They play Texas and Dallas, and then their non-conference has not had a lot of the premier. They haven't been scheduling like Ohio State and Alabama like Texas has in the past. So them in Alabama, they have these long home winning streaks and stuff that seems like that is what influenced this more so than the actual environment. But then you have A&M number 1, which is Eric noted. A&M's home record is not amazing. People talk up the crowd noise at Kyle Field every year, and then SEC teams go in and beat them anyway. So I don't understand how they arrived at it. I can tell you that my experience of being in different stadiums is limited, but Urban Meyer has said that if you play Penn State in Beaver Stadium in a night game during one of their whiteout games, it's worth like a 7-point margin to Vegas. And there are certain places, usually like Penn State and Ohio State are the notorious ones in the Big Ten, and then the other ones are probably all in the SEC. There are places where it's known that it is loud and it is hostile, and not hostile just as in it's hard to get your calls in before the snap. That's true. But also hostile is in you're maybe a little nervous that somebody's going to kill you before you get out of the arena, you know? And
Yeah, I think
list does not capture that at all. I can tell you that.
I'm not sure whether the game has programmed in the the post game potential stabbings or assault that you may endure. I mean, I know we've all talked about, for those at least that had the opportunity to go see Texas play in the shoe during 2005's championship season. I mean, that was probably the most fun I've had and the most scared I've ever been after a game. What, Eric, for you, outside of obviously, DKR, what are some of your favorite places to have seen a game? I saw Texas play at Arrowhead once. They were doing kind of a neutral field, I believe it was, with Kansas State. That was a really fun atmosphere. But for you, what were some of the stadiums you saw some games in that you really enjoyed?
Well, I've been to LSU. Wasn't a very good opponent, but it was a night game, so nobody was sober. Everybody was having fun. Been to Oxford. That was, I mean, they got their butt kicked, so it was hard to get the Ole Miss fans into that one. I went to Notre Dame, Michigan, and was surprised at how docile it was, but also how much litter there was on the ground. It was just ridiculous. I mean, cans everywhere, not even making an effort to throw stuff away. I was shocked by that. That was what really stood out. I haven't been to Texas Tech, but I think that one deserves mention for the amount of they're a little hosile. Their hostility towards Texas fans is well noted. And one that was left off of the Big Ten, I think I'm always amazed at how crazy Camp Randall appears, even at 11 o'clock or 2:30 game. They're ready to go. So I always appreciate Wisconsin. Those fans seem to always be into it.
They do have Camp Randall. What is that? 7th?
Yes.
They are. I should have mentioned them. They have their jump around deal, and those Wisconsins are notorious for their ability to imbibe in time for any kickoff. So,
well, let's move over to the offenses here, and this is obviously their rankings. But I'm going to give you the top 5 here, and I'd love to get your reaction. We'll start with you, Eric. But number 1 is Georgia. Number 2 is Oregon. Number 3, Alabama. Number 4, Texas. And number 5, Ohio State. Does that sound about right to you, Eric?
No, I mean, I would have Texas higher. I think Ohio State's defense is going to be as good as their offense next year. They do have some guys coming back like they always do, but they might be a little high. LSU's offense, are they basing this on last year or what they're expecting this year to be? Yeah, so I mean, I think these are more reputational than anything else. Georgia, you can make a case, I guess, for that. I think Texas has a chance to be the top offense in the country just with the experience at quarterback. Georgia has that as well. I think Texas has better skill players than Georgia. Texas has a good offensive line. I think it's probably Georgia, Texas 1-2. Oregon, of course, Dylan Gabriel is going to produce. He's got a good cast around him. Alabama's interesting. If they keep refining that offense in Jalen Milroe's direction, I think he's got a chance to be pretty good on the ground, and that'll open up the deep ball more. But they lost some playmakers, notably to Texas. So I would have Texas 1 or 2, but it's a video game ranking.
Where do you land on this, Ian?
I think theirs is pretty solid. I agree with Eric that Texas should be higher. I think Texas has a comparable line to Georgia and better skill talent. And I think Quinn Ewers, especially in his 3rd year, is going to be worth a little more than a Dylan Gabriel or I guess that's the only one I see that's heinous to me. Alabama at 94 is in the 2nd and tied with Georgia, and Oregon they're tied with Texas. Sorry, I'm misreading it. Alabama being that high is I could see it, but that feels a little premature. My favorite is Colorado being that high.
Great. Yeah.
That freshman left tackle better be Kelvin Banks, or that's going to age really, really poorly. Yeah. And Clemson also. Clemson has been bad ever since they lost their wide receivers coach, Jeff Scott. They've completely lost their ability to just cycle through NFL receivers. And ever since that's happened, you've noticed that all the 5-star quarterbacks they've put on the field have totally cratered. Like DJ Younglele and then the hometown kid, Cade Klubnik, have not looked like 5-star Clemson passers of the past without the Sammy Watkins or the Mike Williams or the other guys they used to have there. So I think they're still coasting on an outdated reputation.
We want to thank our friends over at Lux Luxury Remodeling for helping us out today and sponsoring this video. Lux Kitchen and Bath, they've been offering high-end kitchen and bathroom remodels for 3 generations throughout the greater Austin area. And you can put your faith in Lux Kitchen and Bath's award-winning designers and skilled craftspeople to bring to life that dream vision of your special home. So give them a call today. You can call Lux's Kitchen and Bath at 833-358-LUX, or you can visit Lux, L-U-X, kitchenbath.com to discover where quality meets luxury. Again, that's 833-358-LUX. We want to thank them so much. Now, before we hop into a very crazy recruiting week, we are starting to see some questions that are popping up in the chat about that, and I'm no doubt going to get to that. But I just want to round out this conversation about NCAA 25 and talking specifically about the defense. One of the things that we have here is we have Texas coming in at number 8 in terms of top 10 defense. Number 1 is Ohio State, followed by Georgia, Oregon, Alabama, Clemson round out the top 5. That seems, do you think that's, I understand we can preface this by saying it's a video game, but there is a perception bias here with potentially Texas's defensive line changes, potentially moving them to an 8 slot. How much would you expect Texas's defense to drop off, if at all, this year, Eric, from last year?
Well, they shouldn't drop off. They're just, I mean, there's the risk that they do because of the losses at D tackle, but they should be vastly improved in the secondary. They should be vastly improved at edge. I don't think there's going to be any drop off at linebacker despite the loss of Jalen Ford. So I am expecting them to be improved. I think the marriage of pass rush and coverage could be the story on defense. I still have a little bit of concerns on the run fits as a team. But that's where Johnny Nansen, I think, is coming in and doing his part. I need more intel on August, but I'm bullish on them being better. I really like the changes. If you go across the board, the improvement in the secondary should be there. And the pass rush, the amount of guys that they can throw out there in waves, you've got to be optimistic about their ability to get after the quarterback. And then I think there's enough bodies at defensive tackle that even though they've lost the singular talents and they don't have nearly the upside they had before, I'd like the rotation. I think they're going to keep those guys fresh. You play a guy, for 30 snaps, he's going to be a lot better at 29 than he's going to be at 39 if he was playing 49 or 40 snaps. So I really feel that they're going to have a good rotation, even though they're not going to have a lot of star power. I do think Alfred Collins will have a decent year, though. So I'm bullish on them being improved. I was a bit surprised to see him this high, over Utah. I'm not exactly sure what Utah loses, but they always play good team defense. I didn't know Oregon's defense was that good. Ian, you're gonna have to clear that one up for me. Ohio State, Georgia, it's hard to counter that.
What are your thoughts on that, Ian?
I think it looks pretty solid. Texas being overperforming would be based on like Jahdae Barron, Javion Cole, and Malik Muhammad just fitting like a glove to opposing receivers. And there's some unknowns in that for like a video game. Like one of those guys is a San Jose State transfer. Another is a sophomore that split time on the field last year, Muhammad. So we think that they could end up having 3 like NFL caliber cover guys on the field at all times with those 3, but it hasn't materialized yet. And so that's going to be the big difference for Texas. Oregon has like, they're kind of like Texas, Eric, and they have all these blue chip edges that are just now going to be like sophomores and juniors that may end up being really good. And then all the defensive tackles that they acquired through the transfer portal that may or may not be stars. Oh, and they got Jabbar Muhammad. That is definitely going to make a difference. That guy is extremely good.
Well, if you are interested in getting the game that comes out next week, we are in the process of setting up a InsideTexas.com league. So if you wanted to join your Dynasty League into the Inside Texas members board, please do that. You can join at InsideTexas.com, where you're going to get all the in-depth information that you can need, including some of the information that we're going to talk about right now. Absolutely, right? Let's get into first. We'll talk to Brett Nelson, a friend who has given us a super chat. Those super chats are going to guarantee that your question gets asked and put on. So this is a little bit more in depth, guys. So I'd like to give you a little bit of time to think about it. So the first is, I want you to rank the position groups from best to worst. Then second, we're going to talk about the opposing team. So shouldn't the opposing teams just figure out what NIL package we're offering and just up it by 10 to 15%, knowing Sark won't reset the market? So this was actually discussed earlier and again in depth on the board, but I want to go, if we can maybe talk about this on a macro level. And if you really want to get into the weeds with us, check us out at InsideTexas.com. But let's start with the position groups. Ian, I'm going to throw this to you first. Let's go best to worst here. What's the best, the best group we've got?
I'm going to say offensive line.
Oh, no way.
I think you can make a case for quarterback, but I think that's a little more based on depth. Like I don't know if Quinn Ewers is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the country, like the very best. He might, I don't know. But then you have another guy behind him that's like almost as good. But the offensive line, their quality is going to be apparent. It doesn't depend on as much on a guy coming off the bench. So I'm going to go line number one.
Eric,
Worst.
you clearly disagree with this. I mean, what do you have?
I'll go wide receiver number one.
Wide receiver number one.
Too much depth.
Does wide receiver even breach your top three, Ian?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
I mean, the line, the receivers, and the quarterbacks, all three of those have the potential to be elite.
It's a lot easier for the wide receivers to be great than it is the offensive line because that doesn't require the same amount of cohesiveness. You can get by on more individual talent rather than the unit working in sync. So I think it's a much higher floor for the wide receiver group to be great this year. They're just relying on good play calls, some decent pass protection, and Quinn getting them the ball. So and they're 6 deep. They're NFL talent. Probably all 6 of those guys have NFL upside. I don't know. Silas Boldness is on the smaller side, but he's looking really good. 5 of those guys are going to get drafted probably eventually, not saying after this year. So I got to go wide receiver number one.
And number 2, are you both sharing quarterback? Is that fair?
I would go quarterback.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't want to go line, quarterback, receiver. I think Eric's right.
I have no problem doing that. I'll
go receivers 1 or 2 for sure. So
wide receiver 1, quarterback 2, O-line 3 for me.
Okay, great. And are we putting the backs? Where are we putting the backs in here? If we're just sticking to offense,
this is tough because
you can't do it. He's not asking us to just stick to offense. He wants it. That's why
I know.
He asked questions that are articles. This should be an article. We have
it should be an article. But guys, he paid for it. He paid for
$10 too. It wasn't one of those $1.99.
No, that's exactly why we're getting into it.
We're trying to work through it. I'll put the edges over running back. I think just because of the amount of depth and rotation.
I'll have corners up there.
Oh, crap.
I think corners.
It's just hard to do. There's aren't really any weak links. Even tight end might be ranked very low. Safety would be low, but they're going to be good units.
It's tough because it's hard to think. I don't usually conceptualize it like this, like ranking the units. It's like, what role does this unit need to play, and can they perform it at elite level or not? It's not like I guess if you're like apportioning credit for the unit being good, I think Eric's right that receivers will probably be number 1, line will be number 2, and corner is going to be up there pretty high. Every single unit on the offense is stacked, and every single unit on the offense is going to be very good at what Sark wants it to do. So it's hard to differentiate. Sorry, Brett.
What about the weakest groups I guess we could say, or not even weak, just like the ones with the most question would be safety, maybe linebacker, and tight end, I guess.
But don't we have a known commodity at safety? I mean, we've got Michael Taft still, guys. He's still on campus.
We have no idea the upside of that group because Makuba is still assimilating. We have no idea the upside with Derek Williams going into his second year. Jelani McDonald is a replacement for Keaton Crawford. Do you think that that's a bonus and an improvement? But we're not sure. So there are a lot of questions at safety. Michael Taft is the lone non-question. Makuba is not a big question, but we don't know. He might play more star as well. I mean, yeah, it's a tough exercise to do live. But I mean, they don't have a whole lot of questions. Linebacker, safety, even tight end, I don't think is a question.
Punter seems like a question, but the staff doesn't seem worried at all.
No.
So
right.
I would want to say punter, but their behavior towards that position makes me think that it's not.
So let's move over to the second part of this, because this is a good transition to what has happened over the last week. And again, I do want to encourage you to check out. Eric just posted an article today at InsideTexas.com that really breaks down what happened last week. And it's very thorough, very detailed. And I recommend that you check that out. But there's a philosophical question that Brett is asking about how should Texas be approaching NIL, just in terms of when they make their offers and how they make their offers. And he's asking the question, shouldn't opposing teams just figure out what NIL package we're offering and just up it 10 to 15%, knowing that Sark won't, quote, reset the market? And I think there's been a lot of confusion on this in terms of what that means. Why, are we setting the value and other people jumping over us, or what's the general process there, Eric?
Well, I mean, it doesn't necessarily play out like this. And first of all, not a lot of teams can just go 10% or 15% over what Texas is doing. That's not really doable for everyone. Everybody's got a little gun shy and understand, because of Oregon, not everybody has Nike behind their school. So it's not necessarily like that right now. I think a lot of agents are using Texas to raise the price based on UT's reputation for NIL, and Texas is not feeling the need to jump the gun. But each one of these recruitments are a little bit different. Yes, they all do have an element of NIL. That's what I discussed about at length in the article. But they're all a little bit different. Texas is not worried about recruiting right now. I think that they feel like they're going to be in a very good place later in the cycle. They still feel like they're very early in the cycle. There's a lot of agents that are trying to raise the price on players that are rather, average and fungible, that Texas just isn't willing to play that game with yet. They don't feel the need to. As far as resetting the market, and I say, Texas doesn't really like to do that. It's not that they haven't done it in the past, and it's it doesn't mean they won't do it in the future. But how much do they need to? Are they at that point yet? Fans would say they are. Staff members and sources would say they aren't. But the staff is working with a lot more information than what the fans are. The fans, and they're not basing their thought process through emotion. Fans are hyper emotional, and when you're emotional, you tend to lose sight of the context. That's what the article was this morning, trying to provide context of where they are. I understand why fans are, a little concerned, but I think it's going to work out. And I think NIL is, everybody. It's funny to see everybody mad about Oregon's NIL. Look at the units that we just talked about being the strength of the team were bolstered, many of them by the portal. Texas went from 5-7 to 12-2 in large part because of NIL. So it's been a major benefit to Texas, more so than everybody, pretty much any team outside of Oregon on this cycle. Maybe Ohio State's clearly on a good cycle. But I wouldn't worry about how Texas is handling NIL. They are in a bit of a lull right now, not necessarily lacking cash. Just playing a little bit different approach than they have in previous cycles.
Go ahead, Ian. Do you have something?
Yeah. The further we get down this road, the more you have to consider how important it is for teams to be able to make good market assessments and not just throw money at every problem. Like, the closer this is to the NFL, you need to have like that Belichick Patriot mindset. Like, Patriot fans used to freak out all the time because Belichick would refuse to pay established stars that everyone loved, and he'd just shove them out the door because he's like, we can find that guy at a better value. Mm-hmm. And then he would do it. And then after a while, the fans were like, okay, sometimes it hurts when you get attached to a player and you lose him, but Belichick's board is a million times better at this than I am, and I have to be willing to live with that process. Texas is not burdened by the salary cap in the same way that the Patriots were. but there is still an element of that. And I think, I mean, we all want to follow particular recruiting stories and particular recruits because you get attached to a particular player or story, and that's normal and it's fun. But the staff has to see things as they have to be a little more objective than that. And like, you don't reset the market for every, you don't in particular, you don't reset the market for a 5-star receiver unless they are like Jerry Rice, you know, from a time machine, because there are so many good ones and it's so easy to solve later.
What you're talking about here is obviously evaluation, right? And I think one of the things that is being discussed is has the need for evaluation become more significant as a result of the NIL, or less significant in the sense that now we have an open transfer portal and we can maybe correct some of our mistakes, is what you're talking about a little bit, Ian, down the road. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, as we've said, you need to make sure that you get the big guys right in recruiting and the guys that are hard to find in the portal later. And the guys that are easy to find in the portal later are like quarterbacks, receivers, skill talents in general. Those guys are really exciting and easy to get attached to out of high school. But your evaluations of those guys are way better with college film than high school film. And it's just, you can make up for it in those spots. Go ahead, Eric.
I go back to Sark saying that he wants to get guys that want to be at Texas first, and they'll figure out the rest later. And the way that this cycle is going, it's more about, hey, pay this guy this and you can have him. And that's, you know, Sark's not going to feel like that guy's a culture fit or a program fit. In fact, it can hurt that player. There was one player they backed off in January just because his dad was making crazy demands that early, and you know they never gave that kid a call again. So that, yeah, I don't think the way this cycle is going, as far as agents, you know, hounding teams, is not conducive to Sark's approach. It's anathema to it. They want to be able to make sure that the guy fits the program. Now, that's not saying they lost all these guys to that. I'm not saying that at all. But there have been cases where they backed off guys. There's commitments they could have taken and had if they wanted to. And maybe on the surface it would look like a better class, but that would tie in. That's kind of like the Belichick approach. They know what they're doing much more than the fans do, and they are looking for good program fits. And it's got to be, they're not going to just go spend irresponsibly.
If you were to,
let me put it this way: if you're going to pay a player more than his position coach, then you have a power imbalance in your program that's going to cause major problems if that guy is, you know, like in basketball terms, if he's more of a, I'm going to get mine, versus a Tim Duncan, I'm going to play defense and do exactly what my coach tells me to do and expect everyone else to do the same. When you're talking that big of a money investment, it better be a culture reinforcer and not a guy that there's any risk of having a diva attitude. Not to say any of these kids they missed out on have diva attitudes, because I don't know at all. But you have to trust the staff to make that evaluation when the investment is going to be that big.
With that, and this is one of the things that I want, that I know that we all saw this coming down the road, this question, but let's talk a little bit about this last week. Let's talk about Riley. Let's talk about DeCorian. And the way that I want to frame this here is in the context of what we've just been talking about, Eric. You know, we have this status now where we are pursuing kids. It's a culture fit, it's a program fit, and then we go ahead and maybe make the NIL offer. With the transfer portal, with all of these elements now that are available to the players to right a wrong and maybe go to a different school after that first year. I mean, it's obviously worked out well for us and Quinn and so many other players. Obviously, you have to stay on a player. You have to stay on in their good graces to a certain degree. But with this particular class, it seems to me, at least, that this is a little bit more business decisions are being made, as it were, than maybe football decisions. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that. Do you think we continue to pursue these players, or is this the type of thing where we gave it our best and now we're moving on down the board?
Well, this graphic is in particular is discussing Riley Pettijohn picking Ohio State due to Texas giving DeCorian more attention. That's not at all what happened.
Right.
That's not Riley Pettijohn has been like the defensive version of DeCorian Moore the entire cycle, and so that's not what happened. He had a really good visit at Ohio State, had a not so great visit at Texas. Texas was very competitive on NIL, but because the visit wasn't quite as good as Ohio State, they were going to have to go above and beyond. But go ahead and put that next one up that touches on it. Will they stay on Riley Pettijohn and DeCorian Moore? I mean, they'll keep tabs for sure. Moore's NIL deal is almost a Nike NIL deal, more so than Oregon. And props to Oregon for leveraging their resources. They're clearly all in. That's going to be a tough one to overcome. I don't think we've heard the last of Pettijohn. I think that there's, Texas has some work to do. I think it's doable. Texas is, I think, going to be remained resolute to do it. They're still going to work on a lot of other linebackers. They need a big class of linebackers. So I think there's a lot of misconception out there that it's either or, like it's Pettijohn or Ferramo. They need at least 3, and maybe 4. They only took 1 last year. They're going to lose a couple this year. They lost a couple to the portal. They're going to lose Anthony Hill after 3 years probably. And so they need a 3 or 4 man class. They'll stay on Pettijohn. There's going to be a lot of – I tell our readers that we try to keep you off the roller coaster. Recruiting is often a nonstop roller coaster, and we do a really good job of that. This cycle is going to be different. It's going to have to be a roller coaster just because Texas is going to stay on their top prospects, and they've already lost a handful of them.
Speaking of our top prospects, why do you think that KJ Lacey is dropping so much in the rankings? And I mean, obviously the rankings are the rankings, and you can only put so much weight on that, but seem to have a very solid Elite 11, yet he's still ranks at around 255 in the On3 rankings. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's size concerns. The more people put their eyes on it, the more concerned they become about his build, his frame. And then maybe he doesn't quite have the compensatory traits that Bryce Young had. I just ride with Sark on his quarterback evaluation. I have zero concerns about it. Anybody that signs with Texas after Arch Manning is not guaranteed to start. It's just because the next guy might be good, or Lacey could be really talented, but because he's behind Trey Owens, he's behind the curve, and it's tough to overcome that. I never thought Mac Jones was going to start ahead of Bryce Young, but because he had that head start, he was able to and put together a fantastic season. I'm not going to worry about quarterbacks at all. However, I do think you got Dia Bell right behind him. I mean, goodness gracious. But I do think it's size concerns.
This is a roster question that I will throw at Ian just because I love doing this to him live. So with the recent DT recruiting struggles, if you want to call it that, we're still in the middle of it. Do you see any O-line currently on the roster that we could move over to D tackle? And if so, who?
No.
Great. Moving on.
Okay. I mean, they don't have the athleticism. Like especially the way Texas recruits O-line, they're not recruiting like 6'2", 285-pound mauling run game guards that could maybe project as defensive tackles. They recruit 6'5", 340-pound dudes that do not have the quickness to get in the right gaps as defensive tackles. Like the guys that are that size and then play defensive tackle, like Devondre Sweat or, Mitchell or January, those guys have a different level of quickness to them that makes all the difference. It's not just that they're hard to move. It's that they can position themselves in a way that makes their size and length hard to move. And these linemen don't have it.
DJ Campbell's the only one on the roster, and obviously he's entrenched at tackle or at guard. Got a very good shot at the NFL if he minimizes the mistakes. That's the one guy that kind of fits the squad or your defensive tackle. And he was so athletic. That's why they took him. Normally they want the bigger monsters like Ian was talking about. But Campbell's a different level athlete. He's the only guy that could do it in my estimation, but would never happen in a million years.
Let's talk a little bit about, I think this has been brought up a couple times. There seems to be no worry amongst the coaching staff. But if you were in this fan base, and again, the roller coaster fan base that is supporting the University of Texas, like what if there were special teams questions? What would those questions be, Ian?
I mean, who the punter is. Whoever they had kicking in the spring game looked solid. I don't know if they're going to have a punter who's kicked in live game settings, right? So that'd be a question mark. They're losing, Xavier Worthy was a freaking amazing punt returner, and Keelan Robinson was amazing in a dozen different things in special teams. But they have other guys that project well there. Eric's reported Trey Wisner is likely to have a Keelan Robinson role where he's just fitting in a few different spots and making plays. And I mean, the way Sark recruits skill talent, it's like, are they going to have someone fast who can catch a punt or a kickoff and be dangerous? Yes. Surely one of them will be fast and dangerous. There's we could all name 10 guys that theoretically at least seem like they could be dangerous in that role. They put a big emphasis on it too. This is the second year in a row where Sark has hired an analyst to come in and help exclusively on special teams. So they have all the inputs you need to be great at special teams, and then they actually try hard to make good on it. So are they going to be number one in the country again in FEI? I don't know. But if they're not top 5 or top 10, we'd be shocked.
Yeah, they lost their gunners. Keelan Robinson got drafted because of his special teams ability. So that's you got to replace him. But again, we're talking about Trey Wisner. That's a kind of a multi-purpose special teams player, and they lost Keaton Crawford as well. He was an excellent gunner on the other side, but they don't lack for DBs that can run downhill. You can see Jelani McDonald over there, any number of guys. They've got a lot of options that are guys that are physical and fast. Not worried about coverage teams at all. Punter is really the only somewhat plausible concern I'd have. But they're like Ian said earlier, they're not worried about punter. They could have got a pretty good punter in the portal and they passed. So they like what they've got.
Well, we are wrapping things up here today. I really appreciate everybody checking in with us on this Monday. Obviously, we're coming off of a holiday weekend where there's probably a little bit of a fireworks hangover. Certainly on the recruiting trail there was. Want to take this opportunity again to thank you. Please check out InsideTexas.com for all your recruiting needs. We are still running a special right now, so please go ahead and check that out. For just $1, if you use the promo code IT1, you'll get 2 months of InsideTexas.com for $1. And we would really appreciate you checking us out. And like I said, a lot of the stuff that we talked about today goes way more in depth in the article. You guys will have an opportunity to really get a better understanding of that. But for Ian, Eric, and myself, we really appreciate you being here. Thanks so much.